It's a new year. And what better way to spend the very first week than to dump the next 12 months worth of disposable income on a new gaming rig? If you start out clueless like I did and don't have at least 2 days to spare, buying the thing pre-assembled is what any sane person would do. But where's the fun in that when you could hand over your cash to dozens of unknown online stores without return policies, never quite sure if what you're getting is real or 3D printed, and then risk all of it by tinkering with it yourself? Though I've learned a lot, this video is neither a guide, nor is it an example of a budget-conscious build. In a futile effort to rationalize my questionable investment, I convinced myself that all the money I never spent within games, I had to spend on something else at some point, so I went a little pay-to-win on the system itself, mostly with a ridiculously priced RTX 40 series and the best-looking RGB parts I could find. At the base of every build lies the motherboard that ultimately brings all the parts together. Nowadays you can choose between DDR4 and DDR5, because choosing among an endless selection of more or less identical looking boards wasn't hard enough already. I'm not gonna pretend I knew what going for the slightly newer and on paper faster technology was really gonna do for me, other than potentially being a waste of money. But in order to not get stuck in analysis paralysis, I narrowed it down to DDR5 and chose this particular MSI board, mostly for its white color and the shiny dragon. The CPU is an Intel i7-13700. I chose the KF variant because it's a little bit cheaper and I didn't see the need for integrated graphics. I had to learn that it's common in China for CPUs to be shipped without original packaging because retail stores receive them in bulk like this, just slapped together in stacks of 10 as if part of some dusty old coin collection. The only way then to tell if you're being tricked is to pay attention to the sides on the lid. If they're indented, the chip has been strapped onto a motherboard before, but if not, you're good. Very reassuring indeed. The newest Intel chips come with tiny notches that are slightly off-center, making it practically impossible to mount incorrectly. Closing the latch though requires a surprising amount of force and feels very wrong the first time you do it. Next up is the SSD. The storage slot is hidden behind a heatsink that's only clipped onto the board and can easily be taken off. Here you can see me remove the knob that's supposed to hold the drive in place and then screw it right back on because I'm a confused man. After a few failed attempts at a technically simple task, the SSD is installed and the heatsink placed back onto the motherboard. I would have been more than happy with half the memory I bought, but I was way too deep into the planning of my build when I found out that 8GB sticks practically don't exist for DDR5 memory, but it had to be 4 sticks for the looks. I can't think of a single use case for this much RAM, but I'll probably never have to close a single Chrome tab ever again. The feeling of not being able to find out if you did everything right so far until everything is assembled many hours later is a terrible one. But at least we're done with the motherboard. Or so I thought until I had a look at the CPU cooler. To install the cooler, I had to first attach a bracket on the back of the motherboard. The problem was that there were 2 sets of screws for different chipsets and form factors, but the manual used the exact same image for both, and the screw backs didn't come labeled. Bruh. Confident in my 50-50 gamble, I installed the backplate with the nicer looking screws and removed the stock fans from the radiator. The case was the first and also the easiest component to choose, and the white version is what motivated me to attempt an all-white build. After removing all the panels, accessories and stock fans, I gently lowered the motherboard into the case and tightened the screws. Now it was time for some fans. I chose the 3rd generation of LianLi's Unifans because they're the best looking fans out there in my opinion. They're also expensive, but especially in a case like this one, I wanted fans that look great from all sides and not just the front. Another perk of these is that you can just clip them together in rows of up to 4. That means less cables to manage and also allows for some cool lighting effects that run across the entire row as one unit instead of every fan for itself. The case offers plenty of space in the front, so I attached 2 fans on each side of the radiator to both act as air intake. It seems like a bad idea to blow hot air into the case, but apparently it's even more important to have a balanced amount of intake and exhaust fans. I'm not gonna argue. Applying thermal paste was much easier than I thought because of this little spatula that it's shipped with for you to make extra sure that the paste is applied evenly. Then I tightened the screws on the cooler pump in a cross pattern and then did the same with the radiator on the side of the case. The highlight of the project is an NVIDIA RTX 4080. The reason I chose a water-cooled graphics card is not because I'm interested in overclocking anything, but because any air-cooled version wouldn't have had enough room to breathe. And I didn't want to have to take off the glass panel on the side just to ensure decent airflow. This card can be much smaller because the cooling doesn't happen on the card itself, but again through a radiator. It also fits the aesthetic of this build to a T. Not only is it silver white, but it also has an RGB strip on the side of the card, which is perfect for a case like this where the GPU is placed vertically. All that was left now was installing the power supply unit and connecting everything, but this took me another day to complete. There were just too many cables, and I also had no idea how to get 5 different sources of RGB lighting onto just 3 RGB headers on the motherboard. After dozens of videos, some of the key takeaways were to follow your motherboard manual like the Bible and you will eventually get through it. If your graphics card requires multiple power connections, try to connect through as many separate power supply cables as possible. At first I had 2 cables plug into 4 connectors and do all the work, but that caused the PC to shut down when playing Cyberpunk for more than an hour. If your fans or other RGB components like the strimmer come with their own control hub and software, you don't have to connect those to an RGB header on the motherboard if you're okay with controlling the fan speed and lighting effects for those components through just the manufacturer's software instead of through the motherboard. With everything finally hooked up, I of course had to make sure the PC turns on before attending to all the cables and potentially just wasting my time, and I peed myself just a little when the system wouldn't produce an image and just shut down by itself. But it came back a few seconds later, and since then everything's been fine. Overall, I could have done a better job tidying up the cables, but out of sight, out of mind, and with that the build was finally finished. Thank you so much for watching, and now I can go back to the original problem: what on earth should I play?